Alright guys, Abel here, your most honest and thoughtful fitness YouTuber. Please tell me that that's true. But regardless, in today's video, I want to be talking to you about bulking. And this is going to be, to date, my most candid and honest assessment of what my actual thoughts are about the topic of bulking and what my best advice to you is on this topic. Before we get too carried away though with today's video, who is this video for? It is for people who have the issue of getting too fat during their attempts of bulking up, okay? If you're a skinny guy who tends to undereat all the time, who has a real issue putting on weight, you're always hovering around 9%, 10% body fat and you're staying skinny and you cannot put on weight, this video is not gonna be helpful for you, okay? If you're the kind of person who, when you see a video on some super high calorie mass gainer shake and you tend to click on that video because you hope that it's gonna help you, close this video because it's not gonna be helpful for you. Or you might watch it for entertainment reasons, it's up to you. But if you're the kind of person who, when you start out with a lean gaining phase, when you're trying to put on muscle, when you finish a cutting diet, and now it's time to start eating in a calorie surplus or maybe even at maintenance, and 2 weeks later, you're already up by several pounds or even kilograms and you're planning your next mini cut, then this video is gonna be helpful for you because these are the kind of people that I'm interacting with on a daily basis, okay? In fact, this is the struggle that I had for a very, very long time. And now, because of some of the content that I made in the past, people that tend to reach out for me for coaching often have this kind of problem. I would say that at least 7 out of 10 people that I coach, by the way, if you didn't know I'm coaching people, link in the description about that. So 7 out of 10 people that I coach have this kind of problem, okay? They get really good at slashing their calories, going on a crash diet, dropping a lot of body fat over the course of a couple of weeks. And when they are done with that cutting phase and they want to get into a lean gaining phase, then 3 weeks later, they are up by several percentages of body fat and they're planning their next cutting phase because they're hating themselves because they got too fat way too quickly. If this is something that is true of you, then I have some very useful information in this video for you, and hopefully the chances of that happening in the future will be somewhat lower. So the first tip that I have for you if you tend to get too fat when you're trying to bulk is to start asking the right questions. Okay, what do I mean by that? The right questions to ask before you start bulking is not what the right amount of calorie surplus is for lean bulking, okay? Whether it's 100 calories, 150 or 200 or 300, that question for you is irrelevant because if you stuck to either one of those numbers, you would not get fat. What is the right amount of calorie surplus for bulking? Well, it's a lot smaller than what you would want it to be, okay? It is not 2,000 calories per day. It is not even 1,000. It's probably not even 500. Muscle growth is slow. And even to build a lot of muscle, the amount of calories you need for that is still pretty small. Even if you're someone who can build 25 pounds of muscle in a year, which can you build 25 pounds of muscle in a year? But let's say you can because you're a newbie or a novice lifter. Even in that case, the amount of weight gain that translates per month is still like 2 pounds. It's been said that to build a pound of muscle, it requires around 2,500 calories, okay? But let's be generous and account for some fat gain as well, and let's say it's 3,500. If you can build 2 pounds of muscle per month, that still leaves us with about 200 calories worth of surplus per day. So it is small, but once again, it is completely irrelevant because if you were to stuck to 100 calories or 150 or 200 or 300, you would not get fat. But it's not your issue. Your issue is that you go way overboard with food, even on a daily basis with your daily nutrition or on the weekends when you go out to eat, and that is the problem. So instead of obsessing over what the right number of calories to eat is for lean bulking, let's ask the right question, and that is how to minimize energy intake. Yes, minimize energy intake during the bulk while maximizing energy levels, while being able to have productive workouts, progress our training over time, and maximize our enjoyment of life. Okay, that is basically the recipe. Minimizing energy intake, maximizing satisfaction, enjoyment of life, and energy levels. If you stick to that equation, you will be on your way of not getting overboard with your fat gain during your lean bulk. Again, for some people, that recipe is not a good way of thinking about things because they might be very skinny guys who always tend to overeat or undereat, For them, thinking about what's the right amount of calorie surplus is useful because if they're not thinking about that, they will always kind of undereat. For you and for me, for that matter, for us, Calorie surplus is just an inevitable consequence of living in the 21st century in the Western world, okay? Going out to eat, having readily available food around us all the time, all of those things are involving a constant influx of calories, which we kind of have to moderate. So for us, the right question is how to minimize energy intake, eat as little as we can while feeling as good as we can. Now, the next thing I want to say about bulking and not getting too fat is stop using the word bulking. Okay, stop using phrases like this, massing phase and gaining phase and bulking phase. Stop using these words because it puts silly ideas in your head. For some people, again, for skinny guys that are hard gainers, it might be useful to think in those terms to make sure that they're eating enough. For us, it just puts silly ideas in our head because when we hear bulking, we think of things like, okay, this is the time to eat big. This is the time to load up on all kinds of energy-dense, calorie-dense, hyper-palatable crap. This is not the time to eat veggies and fruits and lean protein and all those things. No, this is the time to pack on starches and nuts and peanut butter and chocolate. Stop using the word bulking and use a phrase that is a little bit less sexy and is a bit more reflective of the process that actually needs to occur. And that is, once again, minimizing energy intake, maximizing energy levels. So instead of bulking, let's call it training without starving. That is a lot less sexy and is a lot more representative of what actually needs to happen. Or let's call it something like living a healthy fitness lifestyle, training progressively, and fueling our workouts with adequate nutrition. Or training and eating without being in an energy deficit. Something like that. Something that is not as sexy and doesn't put silly ideas in our head and prompts us to fall for behaviors which just get us fat in the long run. Now this brings me to the next tip, and that is don't overestimate the amount of freedom that a calorie surplus is giving you. What do I mean by that? One of the biggest reasons why people get fat when they start out with a muscle gaining phase is that there is a drastic overhaul to their diet compared to their cutting diet. Okay, when they were cutting, they were eating green veggies and fruits and lean protein and things like that. When they start out with a gaining phase, the green veggies go out the window, the fruits go out the window, and they start loading up on starches and rice and chocolate and peanut butter and all those things. And because of that drastic overhaul in structure, there is a massive increase in calories, and lo and behold, the structure goes out the window and their leanness goes out the window, and in a couple of weeks they are super fat. That is a really bad way of going about things, and one of the biggest reasons why that happens is because people drastically overestimate just how big of a difference is actually warranted in the structure of their diet due to the difference in calories. Okay, what do I mean by that specifically? Let's say you finished an aggressive mini cutting phase. Let's say you were in an 800 calorie deficit. That is pretty assertive for most people. Now you finished with your diet, you're super happy, you have your six pack. Now you want to go into a lean bulking phase and you want to be in a 200 calorie surplus. Okay, so from 800 calorie deficit to 200 calorie surplus. Now there is 1,000 calorie difference between your cutting diet and your bulking diet. That is a lot of calories. But the thing is, if you actually distribute those 1,000 calories over, say, 4 meals, which is pretty typical for many people, that is only 250 calories per meal. I mean, that is not that much food, okay? That could be as little as eating a little bit more starch per meal and having an extra fat source per meal. That's it, okay? That means that you could be adding in, an extra bit of rice or some oats or some starch source, just a little bit per meal, and some extra fats. You do that for 4 meals and there is your extra 1,000 calories that you can play with. Or you might want to not do that and just eat more of the same foods that you were eating when you were actually cutting. Because don't forget it, that when you finished your cutting diet, you're leaner than you were before, so you're hungrier, you're a bit more food focused because you just spent several weeks under eating and you were eating in an assertive calorie deficit, so you're a bit more food obsessed, your relationship with food is not so hot, you're not just viewing food as fuel, you're kind of having an emotional relationship with food, more so at least than you had before. So those things are kind of working against you, so you might actually not want to change your food selection whatsoever, just keep eating the same boring cutting foods that you were before and just eat more of them per meal. And you might be surprised that might be completely enough to make up that 1,000 calorie deficit or 1,000 calorie difference between your cutting diet and your bulking diet. So don't overestimate just how much leeway and freedom your bulking calories will give you compared to your cutting calories. You will get more freedom, but the biggest benefit of being in a surplus compared to being in a deficit is that you don't need to struggle with hunger. The biggest benefit of bulking is that you can actually live life like a normal human being without a constant sense of restriction. And of course, you have some extra freedom when you go out to eat. It's easier to save up calories for a social meal, for a restaurant meal. Those are really nice, awesome benefits of bulking. But don't think that just because now you're in a 200 calorie surplus, now it is warranted to just load up on all the culprit foods that you might have and all the energy dense, hyper palatable crap. And of course, this brings me to the next tip, and that is very closely related, is keep using the same habits, rules, and structures that supported you when you were actually dropping fat. Okay, if you adopted some really nice habits during your cutting diet, for example, going for a walk each morning, like I am doing right now, keep that habit in. If you adopted the habit of mindful eating and not being distracted while you're having your meals, like I did, keep that habit up. These are really cool things that will support you towards your aim of staying lean and not rebounding in body fat, but just putting on muscle very, very slowly over time. Of course, some elements of a cutting diet are unsustainable and you shouldn't try to keep them up. One of those being an energy deficit, okay? Living life is not living in an energy deficit. It is eating enough food to feel good, have good energy levels, sleeping well, all of those things. But whatever habits you can keep up from your cutting diet, keep them up. Something that I like to say often is whenever you're completing a fat loss phase, at each step of the journey, ask yourself, which of those habits and daily routines and actions can I keep up for the rest of my life, ideally? Because that's what should happen, because the habits that get you lean will ultimately have to become the habits that keep you lean. And if this is something that sounds torturous, if this sounds like a proposition that makes you feel sick in your stomach, that means that you haven't done your homework during your actual cutting diet. If your cutting diet feels like an absolute torture, something that if you had to keep it up for another month, then you would shoot yourself, that means that your approach is not sustainable. And once again, if that is not sustainable, then your maintenance phase is also not going to be sustainable. Then you're just going to gravitate back towards the habits that you had before during your cutting diet, and those are the habits that ultimately got you fat in the first place, or at least gotten you to a body composition which prompted you to start the cutting diet in the first place. Now, the next thing I want to tell you is don't get into an all or nothing mindset when it comes to your calorie surplus. And what I mean by that is a lot of people, and I tended to fall for this in the past as well, a lot of people have this idea that, okay, now I'm starting out with my gaining phase, now I'm bulking, this is my one chance to build a lot of muscle, so I have to be in a calorie surplus each and every day. And that what happens, of course, they go out to a restaurant and they overshoot their calories, because that's just what happens a lot of the times in a restaurant, and they overeat by 1,000 calories, let's say. And then comes the big dilemma. Now, what should I do? Should I go into a deficit the next day? But man, I can't do that, I'm bulking, I have to stay in a surplus, I'm wasting my bulking phase. So they keep eating in a surplus, but they're kind of hating themselves in the back of their minds because they know that they way overshot the previous day. So probably a deficit would be warranted, but now it's the bulking phase, so they can't do that. And that is one way of getting fat really, really fast. Okay, don't kid yourself. If you way overdo your calories on one day, just go into a freaking deficit the next day. If you're over by 1,000 calories on one day, go into a 1,000 calorie deficit the next day, or into a 500 calorie deficit and do that for 2 days, or a 300 calorie deficit and do that for 3 days. Okay, you're not going to waste anything. Okay, if you're over by 1,000 calories on one day and you go into a 1,000 calorie deficit the next day, it's not like your body and your metabolism is resetting itself each and every day. The 1,000 calorie surplus on one day will have some carry over to the next day. It's not like you just went into a 1,000 calorie deficit and now your body is starving. No, it's kind of going to balance itself out. So don't have an all or nothing mindset. And even if you kind of wasted one day of bulking by going into a deficit, so what? You wasted one day? I mean, ideally, you would be in a gaining phase for several months, right? One day is not going to do anything. So have a bit of a longer term perspective. Don't have an all or nothing mindset. And lastly, just know that the whole idea of bulking, unless you're a brand newbie or unless you are in some special circumstance, like maybe using performance enhancing drugs or something like that, the whole idea of bulking is pretty damn overrated. Okay, by and large, most people, what they find when they're bulking is that they get fat and then they do a cutting diet, they torture themselves for a couple of weeks, and they get smaller again. And at the end of that whole cycle, they will find that hopefully they are a tiny bit bigger than they were before, okay? But you can get to the same place by going much more slowly and gradually, have an enjoyable, sustainable lifestyle when you're not packing on fat super fast, and just gradually get to the same place. It's kind of like you can go from A to B by doing a whole circle, sprinting like crazy, and when you complete the circle, arrive here, or you can just go from A to B at a slow and steady pace and not take the whole bunch of extra needless miles. And I know that a lot of people that you're following online, maybe bodybuilders, maybe fitness models, whoever, are doing these big bulking phases and then cutting phases. And a couple of things about that I want you to keep in mind. One thing is that a lot of those guys are doing that because they are content producers. And if they are just very slowly bulking and they're kind of looking the same all the time, they have no content to make for you, okay? They have to keep doing new stuff. And if week after week they appear in front of the camera bigger and bulkier and fluffier and stronger looking, and then they go into a cutting phase and then they are like shriveling up and getting cut and vascular and everything, then they always have something new and exciting to show you. Hey guys, I'm going into my bulking phase and I'm getting huge, and okay, bulking is over and I'm going into mini cuts, 2 weeks update into my mini cut. That is something cool that they can show you and that keeps you engaged. That is one reason, but it doesn't mean that it's any more optimal than not doing that and just going slowly and steadily and kind of having a more so sustainable gain-gaining, lean-gaining approach to this whole thing. The other thing that I want you to keep in mind is that the reason why a lot of bodybuilders are doing these things is because people that are really into lifting, by and large, like to chase feelings, okay? That is the same reason why people chase the pump in the gym. That is why people keep chasing muscle soreness in the gym, because when they are feeling like something is happening, then they have the idea that what they're doing is working. So when you're bulking up and you're feeling like you have to force feed yourself and your body is getting bigger and you're feeling nauseous from stuffing yourself from all the food, then you have the idea that, man, I'm living the bro lifestyle. I'm such a bodybuilder. I'm getting massive. The thing is, if you're force feeding yourself and you're feeling like you cannot eat any more food, that has nothing to do with muscle gains. That has to do with your fat cells. Okay, that means that your leptin levels are maxed out, your ghrelin levels are tanked because your fat cells are not willing to expand anymore, and they want you to not eat as much food anymore because you're just force feeding yourself to get fat. That is the only indication of you feeling nauseous from all the food. But people like doing that because they are chasing the feelings, because those are the feelings that give them the idea that their protocol is working. And conversely, when they start cutting, then they're getting smaller, faster, they are seeing new cuts in the mirror every week, and it's like, man, now I'm unraveling all the muscle that I built. But when you complete the whole cycle, you realize that at the end of it, when you arrive to the same body fat percentage where you were before your bulk, you're kind of at the same size or maybe slightly bigger. So don't chase these temporary feelings. If this is something that you just enjoy doing as a game, if you're a bodybuilder or something, then keep doing that. But if you just want to have a sustainable lifestyle, you want to kind of look good all the time and slowly over time become a more muscular, bigger, stronger version of yourself, then there is no need for doing that. You can just eat in a sustainable fashion, fuel your body, fuel your performance, eat enough food to feel good and have a good quality of life. And that is plenty. That is all the things that you need for muscle growth. Okay, in the fitness industry, we debate whether you can build muscle in a deficit. And the thing is, yes, you can, unless you're super advanced and you've been training for, I don't know, a decade super productively, then yes, you might not build muscle in a deficit. But most people can. Now, if you can build muscle in a deficit, then you can certainly build muscle in just a small surplus, and you can even build muscle at maintenance just fine. So don't overthink how many extra calories you need and how much you need to force feed yourself and how fat you need to be to build muscle. So these are the tips that I had for you today. Hopefully this was helpful and this gave you some encouragement for your lean gains for 2020. I hope that that's the case. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to work together with me, if you want to build muscle without getting fat, or maybe you want to get your new lean physique in 2020, then check the description box and then you can have some information about my coaching. Other than that, I want to thank you for your attention. Like the video if you liked it, comment, let me know what you thought, and subscribe for more content like this. So that's all I had for today, and see you in the next video.